a quiet little bookstore.
In a town where whispers roam, a wolf-turned man found a place called home. Sunlight streams through the window panes, a cozy bookstore where magic reigns. Pages turn with every heart's desire, filling the air with tales that inspire. By day it's quiet, the world feels still, but as dusk falls, it's time for the thrill. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. He weaves the stories of distant lands, with creatures that play in the palm of his hands. The whispers of legends fill the room, from dragons to dreamers, the shadows bloom. In the laughter we forget our fears, sharing our hopes, the dreams of our years. The flicker of candles, the warm glow inside. In the embrace of tales we let love guide. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, the wolf among us comes alive at night. Friends gather round with laughter and cheer. In the heart of the stories we hold our dear. Games on the table, love and delight. In this little bookstore, everything's right. We dive into realms.
Actually trying to finish a bar of donut I had. Oh, I forgot to turn my model on. Yeah, thank you for being here. Eventually I will show up. Hi, Crimson. I'm on YouTube Studio. Yay, I'm here. Sorta. Ow. Blinding light. Okay, there we go. Now my model's working. But welcome in. Glad you can be here tonight. I am starting... Well, it's always strange when I say that I'm starting a new book, because this new book I'm starting is, 80 years old. Admittedly, this book is 80 years old because it was printed during World War II. But the stories are considerably older. In fact, I should probably put a language warning on just because the stories are older and modern terminology would probably look down on some of the wording. Oh, a lot of the wording, honestly. But I will try to read it as the book has it. Of course, welcome in, Crimson. Congrats on getting second. Thank you, Nicola, for getting in first. And, feel free to lurk. Watch the cat that may or may not come in and nap on the bed. I usually wait around in the bookstore until 9:10 my time. Just so if stragglers come in, they don't miss too much. Copy of the Foundation trilogy. Oh, that's cool. In the 50s. That's not bad. Let's say, I really like getting books from thrift books, but I also get a lot of books from estate sales. This one I actually just bought last weekend. That's one that I really feel like needs to be remade because it's not in the best condition. And the dust cover that had on it, they cut it into pieces and taped it inside so it wouldn't be lost. Of course, this was edited by someone who was born in Boston, educated at Harvard and Columbia, and at the University of Nebraska. Then from 1921 to 1940, they were associated with the English department of the Oklahoma University. And this is one of the books that literally has the government's pay-per-use stamp in it. And it says, this book is manufactured under the wartime conditions of conformity with all government regulations controlling the use of paper and other materials. The fact that they did that in 1944 says a lot. Which also means the paper is really thin. And this book has songs in it too, with the actual music, so if I really wanted to, I could. Well, it's all in treble clef, but still. I can't read treble. I'm a bass clef person. The Lane County Bachelor. This is a very long song. Oh. Thrift stores are great places to find books. It's a hunch crowing chap. Yeah, those roots. Had an estate sale. Marked in pencil for $8. Which is probably a lot more than it was when they bought it. I'm pretty sure my entire library is going to end up in a thrift store when I die. Provided that happens. Because folklore books alone, I have 3 or 4 bookcases. I really need to organize it better. I mean, I'd figure out what the Dewey Decimal numbers are for all these, but they'd all be so close together. Anyway, the book tonight, and probably for the next couple of months, depending on how fast I read through this, Treasury of American Folklore. And when I was saying that they taped the dust cover inside the book, they cut the dust cover off and taped it inside on the front page. But they taped it badly, so it forced the pages to stick together a little. The entire title of this book, as you can see, is A Treasury of American Folklore. These stories, legends, tall tales, traditions, ballads, and songs of the American people. And it is a combination of everything on that list. Why am I off center again? I don't move my model that much. Get in the chair. Now, since it is a new book, it does have an introduction. And it's going to have a foreword by the editors. Well, it's going to have a foreword. Then it's got the table of contents. Then it's got the introduction by B.A.Botkin. So it'll be a pretty long read. All the stories are usually printed in just like 1 or 2 pages at a time. If that. Of course, it's also, I would say it's probably 10-point print. But it is block printing. I don't see nearly as many errors in this one as I did in the other books. If everyone's ready, feel free to settle back and get comfortable. Set up the chair again. Okay. I'm not sure if I'll have to do a lot of different voices for this one. I've only read into it first couple of stories. But I do know... Oh, switch to the information. Okay. Hopefully people will figure out what this means. Boomer language. No, it's printed at the beginning of the baby boom. Well, the baby boom was caused by World War II because people were so happy the war was over and they had nothing else to do. They got busy increasing the surplus population because there was so much wealth, supposedly. Anyway, again, if everyone is ready, I will do the title and foreword. A treasury of American folklore, the stories, legends, tall tales, traditions, ballads, and songs of the American people. Edited by B.A.Botkin and Foreword by Carl Sandburg. Foreword. We have heard of the boy and his sister. Forward. We have heard of the boy and his sister coming home from school to tell their mother, "We learned today that we have been talking prose all our lives and we didn't know it." Likewise, many of us grown-ups have talked a lot of folklore in our lives, and we didn't know what was folklore. And if we had known, it wouldn't have made much difference. You can't stop them from telling it, even if they politely warn you beforehand. Stop me if you heard this. They, or we, are irrepressible as the tenacious debating opponent of whom Abraham Lincoln said in 1858 that the only way you could make him quit would be to stop his mouth with a corncob. So here we have nothing less than an encyclopedia of the folklore of America. An encyclopedia is where you get into the boxcar of numbers. There have been many small fry collections of folklore, we might say, but this one is a big shot. It will pass the time, furnish laughter, provide entertainment. And then besides giving you the company of nice, darnful yarn spinners, it will give you something of a feel of American history, of the gloom chasers that moved many a good man who fought fire and flood, varmints and vermin, as region after region is filled with the settlers and homesteaders who proclaimed, "We're breaking sod for unnumbered millions to come." And now that the days of those pioneers are past, we have cities and skyscraping structures of steel and concrete that would have amazed them, motion pictures and radio transmissions that someone declared plumb ridiculous. Not to mention the tractors which can plow without mules, and storm-proof all-steel buggies and wagons that do better than a mile a minute without a horse to pull. And this smart later generation of youth has its folklore, and our encyclopedia has plenty of specimens of little Audrey, of Knock-Knock Who's There, of the little moron who, being told he was dead, ordered that he should be moved into the living room. Something rather sweetly modern and quite impossible to see is coming alive out of the former generation is such a story that the editor dug out of Chicago Industrial Folklore by Jack Conroy. There it was hiding out in the manuscripts of the Federal Writers Project of the Works Progress Administration for the state of Illinois. It tells about Sappy Hopper, the world's biggest, fattest, bestest signs painter, and is a fresh modern masterpiece worth standing alongside the well-liked antiques which will not fail to be passed along from generation to generation. A long-time book is this. One reading won't do for it. There are places in it where good fools have such love for other good fools that places in it that they must trade the follies and whims of their imaginations to help forget their troubles and even their tragedies. Excellent authority tells us that the right laughter is medicine for weary bones, and on many a page here one may find a droll smile or the rocking laughter that moved many a humble and honest struggler on American soil as he studied, with whatever of mind he had, what the present of his country was, and what the future might be. The people, or the folk of the present hour, that is, and of the future that it may be, many and many of them are seen here from their toil, struggle, and laughter, are heard and made known in part in the heaped up and sprawling materials of this book, the threes of the human diversity of these United States. Carl Sandburg. They had such high hopes for this country back then. The table of contents in this thing is about 20 pages long. Anyway. Nice introduction. Oh. The introduction is even in 4 parts. Because each section is a different time period, basically. So, introduction. 1. When I began to think of a book of American folklore, I thought of all the good songs and stories and all the good talk that would go into it, and of what a richly human and entertaining book it would be. A book of American folklore, I thought, should be as big as the country of ours, as American as Davy Crockett and as universal as Brer Rabbit. For when one thinks of American folklore, one thinks not only of the folklore of American life, the traditions that have sprung up on American soil, but also of the literature of folklore, the migratory traditions that have been found in a home here. Because folklore is so elemental, and folk songs and stories are such good neighbors and pleasant companions, it is hard to understand why American folklore is not more widely known and appreciated. Not yet, fortunately. For the word folklore is partly responsible. Folklore is a scholar's term for something that is as simple and natural as singing songs and spinning yarns among the folk who know the nature and the meaning, but not the name, and certainly not the scholarship of folklore. Because the word denotes both the material and its study, and has come to stand for more the study of the thing rather than the thing itself. Folklore. In fact, it seems to have become the possession of a few who study it rather than the many who make use of it. The evidence of folklore, however, is something that cannot be contained by a definition, but what grows upon one with folklore experience. Old songs, old stories, old sayings, old beliefs, customs and practices, the mind skills and hand skills that have been handed down so long to seem to have a life of their own. A life that cannot be destroyed by print, but that constantly has to get back to the spoken word to be renewed. Patterned by a common experience, varied by individual repetition, inventive or forgetful, and cherished because somehow characteristic or expressive, all this, for want of a better word, is folklore. Welcome in, guilty. Congrats on getting 3rd. Complementary to the "stop me if you've heard this" aspect of folklore is the trait implied on the comeback. That's not the way I heard it. But what makes the thing folklore is not only that you have heard it before, yet want to hear it again, because it is different, but also that you want to tell it again in your own way, because it is anybody's property. On the one hand, repeated telling establishes confidence in the rightness of what was said, and how it is said. On the other hand, the beauty of a folk lyric, tune, story, or saying is that, if you don't like it, you can always change it, and if you don't, somebody else will. But if folklore is old wine in new bottles, it is also new wine in old bottles. It says not only, back where I come from, but also, where do we go from here? If this book is intended to bring the reader back to anything, it is not to the good old days, but to an enjoyment and understanding of living American folklore for what it is and what it is worth. This is an experience which Americans, as compared to other peoples, are sadly deficient. Perhaps it is because we're not one people, but many peoples in one, and a young people who have not grown up too close to the machine age. The industrial folk tales and songs in this book are evidence enough that the machinery does not destroy folklore. Rather, in our rapid development of the rural to agricultural to an urban and industrial folk, we have become estranged to the folklore of the past, which we cannot help feeling a little self-conscious or antiquarian about, without yet being able to recognize or appreciate the folklore of the present. Perhaps The best way to understand the songs and stories in this book is in terms of a species of living literature, which has no found form, in this respect different from the classics, which it resembles in permanence and universally in appeal, and which is constantly shifting back and forth between written and unwritten tradition. Since print tends to freeze a song or story, folklore is most alive, or at home out of print, and its purest form is associated with the grapevine and the bookless world. But that does not make it synonymous with illiteracy or ignorance, nor is it true that the educated do not also have their lore, or that lore ceases to be lore as soon as it is written or published. Folk literature differs from the rest of literature only in its history. Its author is the original forgotten man. Not only does folklore shift, but it changes as it shifts between the top and bottom layers of culture. As it gets nearer to the world of professional poets and storytellers, it tends to shape about its form as a formal literature tradition of its own, and in the great collections of legends and folk tales that have come down to us from ancient and medieval times and have been pored over by scholars. But alongside this is more classic folk literature, which has acquired scholarly prestige, and which gives and takes erudition and humbler and homelier folk literature of everyday life from the common man. Today's people literature, which is older folk literature may have been once, the difference between the two, a difference perhaps only by degree, was the difference, say, between the English and Scottish ballads and the Dust Bowl ballads of Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie is a friend of my family. I seem to know a lot of people indirectly. Anyway, Woody Guthrie also did a really good song about Trump. Well, Fred Trump. Anyway, let's not distract too much from this. This range of variation within the folklore field is a source of both strength and weakness. For while it enables folklore perpetually to rebuild itself from the ground up, it creates a kind of class consciousness among folklorists. Thus, the British folk song and the folk dance expert, Cecil J. Sharp, while very much taken with the vigor and beauty of our own mountain songs and dances, one is able to see in our cowboy songs anything but the fact that the cowboy has been despoiled of his inheritance of traditional song, and has nothing behind him, and nothing but himself and his daily occupations to sing about, and that it is a self-centered and self-conscious way. For example, cowboy's life is a dreadful life. I'm a poor, lonesome cowboy. I'm a lonely bull whacker, and so forth. Further complicating and diversifying the picture is a third quantity, midway between folk and academic, the popular. The latter is distinguished by its wider and more passing acceptance, the result of transmission through such timely media as stage, press, radio, and films. Yet the so-called lively arts, jazz, vaudeville, burlesque, comic strips, and animated cartoons, pulps, often have a folk basis or give new rise to new folk creations, such as Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. Many of the innovations of popular lore are associated with new inventions. For example, the Ford joke and the Gremlins. At the same time, many of our modern gags have an ancient and honorable, if sometimes wheezy, lineage. One about the two Irishmen, the Hebrew, and the Bologna, the Three Dreams, goes back to the 12th century, while the little moron jokes are as old as the Turkish nation, Asardum, and Nasreddin. Also, close to folk resources, but to be distinguished from folk literature proper, is literature about the folk. This ranges from old-timers' reminiscences. One of the great examples of the book is Martha L. Stewart's Going to God's Country, and homespun humor, and verse to local color and regional stories and sketches, all of which throw light on the folk and folklore backgrounds, culminating in that small body of masterpieces of folk art, mined out of the collective experience and imagination of writers, known and unknown, which have succeeded in identifying themselves with the folk traditions. That was section 1 of the introduction. It's like, dang. Two. It would be possible to get a good idea of American folklore by reading the 57 volumes of the Journal of American Folklore. Gosh, that's a lot of books. 3 streams, nice. Since, however, writers of all kinds are always making use of folklore one way or another, sometimes when one least expects it, one can turn up a surprising amount of good folklore simply by going through books, magazines, and newspapers. The present collection is a generous sampling, selected and arranged according to the interpretive principle of relating the material to certain folk motifs, such as hero worship, boasting, pranking, jesting, artistic lying, and the like. But further relating these activities to certain regional and occupational groupings, the book is designed to reveal the cultural pattern of which American folklore is part. The term American folklore is employed here in the sense that one speaks of American literature, language, humor, etc., as an expression of the land, the people, and their experience. The same images and symbols have permeated all parts of this expression, so that folklore, language, literature, and humor are inseparable. American folklore is a much narrower and yet more definite concept than folklore in America, which includes not only all the Americas, but European folklore in America. For practical purposes, because I have had to draw the line somewhere, I have limited myself to folklore in the English idiom in the United States, excluding necessarily the Indian and foreign language minorities. It is with considerable regret, and not with any intention of overstressing the Anglo-Saxon element, that I have had to dispense with the contrasts, loss of diversity there may be in compensating gain in unity. That skipped a line. That I have had to dispense with the contrast of these strips, stripes, and streaks of color. But for the resultant loss of diversity, there may be a compensating gain in unity. Even within these limits, I have collected a great deal more than I could find room for. In order to keep the book further in hand, 2 tests were applied to the selections: readability, with an emphasis on literature and especially narrative interest, and permanence and breadth of appeal. Articles and collections of data being ruled out, customs and beliefs are represented only as they enter into song and story. According to my conception of folklore as the stuff that travels and the stuff that sticks, the basic principle of selection, I have had to leave out much good material valuable to social history, rather than as folklore purely local in interest. At the same time, a certain amount of stuff that travels without sticking, or that sticks without traveling, has been included as representative of folklore in the making. And dealing with such a large mass of material from so many different sources, and of so many different types and tones, it sometimes becomes difficult to see the woods for the trees. I have chopped down a few trees here and lopped off a few branches there. It is also to clear a path through the wilderness. If I have preferred a little looseness and too much tightness of selection and arrangement, it is because I believe a smoother flow is achieved thereby, also because I wanted to give a mass effect of thousands of unknown singers and storytellers. To vary the pace and to show both the discrete and recursive folk imagination at work, short and long pieces have been intermingled in varying proportions. In those cases in which a song or story might have served more than one purpose, it has been placed where it seems to have the most effect. In the same way, I have chosen variations of which that seem the most effective, though the reader will probably think of versions he likes better, possibly because undesirable. Possibly because he knows them better. I would like to hear of these too. Wherever possible and desirable, I have preferred the earlier sources, though there are seldom, if ever, original sources of folklore. In the matter of text, I've left spelling, punctuation, etc. alone, in spite of inconsistencies, except where they might get in the way of the reader. Original titles have been retained for complete pieces, but in the case of excerpts, no attempt has been made to distinguish between the original and added titles. And the amount and nature of the introductory comments in solid type by the editor, 2 rules have been observed. Where material is already available in other books, as in various types of folk tales and folk songs, the comment has been kept to a minimum. Where the material is fairly fresh, as in the first 4 parts of the book, more comment has been deemed necessary. 2. The approach has been broadly literary and social rather than strictly folklorist, and uninitiated footnotes are by the author. 3. Although for the most part have preferred to let American folklore speak for itself, in one respect it is necessary to distinguish between folklore as we find it and folklore as we believe it ought to be. Folklore as we find it perpetuates human ignorance, perversity, and depravity, along with human wisdom and goodness. Historically, we cannot deny or condone the baser side of folklore, and yet we may understand and condemn it as we condemn other manifestations of human error. Folklore, like life itself, is a Santa Yara's phrase, animal in its origins and spiritual in its possible fruit. Much of the animalism, of course, does not appear here except for the implication because of the taboos surrounding print. What does come through, however, often in violent contradiction with our modern social standards, is the essential viciousness of many of our folk heroes, stories, and expressions, especially in their treatment of the minorities, Indians, Negroes, Mexican, Chinese, etc. Perhaps the most glaring example of this is in the story Roy Bean and the Chinaman. With its characteristic rough and antisocial humor and its ruthless frontier philosophy of necktie justice. This and like stories stick because they have a tang of life. They should be preserved, not to perpetuate, but to correct the errors they reveal. With this perspective, the whole of folklore may be an instrument for understanding and goodwill. A word should be said here about the movement that seeks to make folklore the basis of an entire social and art tradition. One can forgive folksiness, almost everything, its nostalgia, its quaintness, its cuteness, but not its clannishness, which is next to chauvinism, and which speaks to folklore in terms of racial heritage, or insists that the particular folk group or body of tradition is superior or pure. On the other hand, it is not necessary to go to the opposite extreme and to deny the importance of folklore, and even a healthy provincialism, as one of the ingredients, though not necessarily most important ingredients, of a well-rounded culture. It is hoped that, while preserving the normal view of folklore, the book may serve as an inspiration and a source book for writers, teachers, and others who are concerned with the materials of American culture. For the rest, I've tried to let the material flow as it is in shaping itself about our ways of thinking and feeling in America, much as the literature of American folklore may be said to shape itself around the folklore of American life. In this way, I've sought not only to give an American view of folklore, but a folk's-eye view of America. By going to almost every form and medium of writing about America, as well as to the regular folklore publications, I have hoped to give a broader and more living conception of American folklore than is to be gained from any single line or approach. So, the editor's openly admitting there will be language in this book. So, 4. The source of each selection is indicated in a note at the foot of the page on which the selection begins. Where several selections appear on the same page, the sources are indicated in the same order. The source notes constitute at once a complete list of acknowledgments and have a selected bibliography. Special thanks are due to those who have contributed unpublished material, and to the Federal Writers Project, for which much of this material was originally written. Grateful acknowledgments, yeah, grateful acknowledgments are due to the many authors and publishers, selections from whose publications are included in this book. An exhaustive effort has been made to locate all persons having any rights or interests in the material, and to clear reprint permissions. If any required acknowledgments have been omitted or any rights overlooked, it is by accident, and forgiveness is desired. In addition to those who have read or discussed with me various parts of this book at one time or another during the 4 years it took which to take shape, the following have been close to the work as a whole. Paul R. Feebledson Faith, especially for this first compilation. Gertrude Botkin, my wife, who shared the labor with me from first to last. Hugo V. Wonguro, who made the music drawings. Crime publishers, consistently sympathetic with encouragement and support. Edmund Fuller, who first suggested an idea and name for the Treasury of American Folklore and saw through it to the end. Bertha Krantz, his assistant, who handled the permissions and served as a steadying influence. Charles Seeger, who served as a music consultant for the book. Finally, without the collections of the Library of Congress, with which my work as a fellow in folklore, as well as a folk song archivist, has brought me in close contact, this book would not have been possible. B.A.Botkin, Washington, D.C., March 1944. Damn, that was a long introduction. It really was just the introduction. And for the book, we are now Part 1. Heroes and Boasters. The history of any public character involves not only the facts about him, but what the public has taken to be facts. J. Frank Davy. The heroic spirit, as seen in heroic poetry, we are told is the outcome of society cut loose from its roots, of a time of migrations and of the shifting of populations. John G. Nearhart. Bragging saves advertising. Sam Slick. Ooh. That's just going to be one part of the video. Introduction on its own. Took 20 minutes. That's crazy. So, Part 1. Backwoods Boasters. The backwoodsman is a soldier from necessity. Mind and body have been disciplined in a practical warfare. He belongs to this continent and no other. He is an original. He thinks big and talks big, and when it is necessary to toe the mark, he acts big. He is a genius of the New World. James K. Paulding. These are the untamable. America has always been America has always been second in the production of the roughs. Bernard DeVoto. 1. The Irrepressible Backwoodsman. Hero tales tell us more about a people than perhaps any other tales. For as admirable and exceptional men, heroes embody the qualities that we most admire or desire in ourselves. So we begin with the heroes in our most potent folk symbols and most reliable touchstones of a people's choice. In every age, heroes arise from a people's dream of greatness or from homage to the great and near great. In other times and places, heroes receive their sanction from religion or mythology as they derive their being or their powers from a world other than our own. Lacking a body of true myth and ritual, Americans conceive of their heroes, save for vague demigods of the Paul Bunyan type, as strictly of this world, however much they may take us out of it. In modern times, especially in a democracy, hero myths and hero worship have become inextricably mixed. For the universal need of models larger than life, or desire to be ruled by strength and ability, Americans choose or create heroes in their own image. In a complex industrial society, hero making goes on all various levels, so that every walk of life and almost every occupation have their heroes. Especially, however, American heroes are of three main types: the poor boy who makes good, the good boy gone wrong, and the kind that is too good or too bad to be true. Thus, on one hand, the school books and the popular literature of edification draw upon the ranks of leaders, explorers, pioneers, soldiers, statesmen, inventors, and industrialists, for patron saints and tutelary geniuses to inspire love of country or teach the ethics of success. On the other hand, the dime novel, concealed behind a geography book, glorifies a gentleman on horseback and the demons with a six-shooter. Midway between these two extremes is the American fairyland of strong men and giants who perform the impossible. A composite picture of the American hero would show him to be a plain, tough, practical fellow, especially good at a bargain or fight, a star performer on the job, and a hellraiser often, and sometimes a salesman or showman with a flair for the prodigious stories, jokes, and stunts, and a general capacity for putting himself over. Our nearest approach to a national myth, explaining and justifying the many contradictions of our heroes, is the frontier or pioneer myth. This reconciles the primitive virtues of brute strength, courage, and cunning with the economic virtues of thrift, hard work, and perseverance. The backwoodsman was the first of our tall men, whose words were tall and whose deeds were tall tales. Romantic fiction has made much of his fierce, wild courage and independence and his rough diamond of chivalry, as well as his skill with a rifle. That murderous weapon, wrote Audubon of the Kentucky hunters, is a means of procuring the substance during all their wild and extensive rambles, and is a source of their principal sports and pleasures. It has also brought them into the national prominence in the Battle of New Orleans, January 8th of 1815. Tough as hickory, these Coon-Skin voters helped put Old Hickory in the White House 13 years later. In May 1822, 7 years after the battle, before a New Orleans audience of stamping, clapping, whooping boatsmen, Gilman boatsmen, to whom had fought under Jackson, Noah Ludlow, the comedian, sang a song which marked the passing of the backwoodsman from history into legend. This was The Hunters of Kentucky. By this time, too, the backwoodsman had emerged into the later phases, like Mike Fink, the hunter who became a riverman, and beyond the Mississippi, flowing his free, wild way of living, he was to revert once more, like Mike Fink, to hunting and trapping. In pursuit of game, skins, scalps, land, or adventure, the backwoodsman followed the shifting fringe of settlements, marching ahead of civilization or running away from it. As a picturesque type, the footloose adventurer, he illustrates what Lucy Lockwood Hazard calls the dwindling of a hero, from the godlike or kinglike to the average human or subhuman level. 2. Lion of the West. More and more, as the country was settled, the backwoodsman motto became, in the words of the picturesque Simon Suggs, "It is good for a man to be shifty in a new country." To be shifty in a new country meant beating the other fellow to it. For a society that cannot support a large population puts a premium on outdoing, outrunning, outlicking, and outhollering one's neighbor. Men with the bark on must also be the men with the gumption and gusto, who could talk, as well as walk, tall into the scrapes, rows, and sprees. Boasting, the epic brag, has always been part of the trappings of the hero. The strong man of the Beowulf type, or the medieval knight, would gird himself for combat and inspire confidence in his followers by rehearsing his exploits in big talk. In the Paradise of Puffers, however, the backwoods boaster tended to boast in terms of the future rather than of the past, and seemed more interested in making claims than living up to them. Moreover, since boasting, like bombast, contains in itself the seeds of its own travesty, it became hard to distinguish bragging from windy laughing and bragging, and serious from mock and burlesque boasts. From his noise, the boaster became known as a roarer or screamer. Because the qualities of the horse and the alligator seemed almost as fitting to the animal antics and those of the ring-tailed roarer, the alligator horse, or half-horse, half-alligator, became their emblem. It is an old remark, criticizes Washington Irving, that persons of Indian mixture are half civilized, half savage, and half devil, the third half being provided for their particular convenience. It is the similar reasons, and probably the equal truth, that the backwoodsmen of Kentucky are styled half men, half horse, and half alligator, by the settlers on the Mississippi, and held accordingly in great respect and abhorrence. Perhaps the best literary description we have seen of the strange breed in action is Robert Montgomery Bird's portrayal of the Salt River Roarer. Roaring rash Stackpole, rascally horse thief, and stentorian braggart, in Nick of the Woods, 1853. Like the first successful Yankee character, Jonathan, in Royal Tyler's Contrast, 1787, the first full-length portrait of the ring-tailed roarer was a stage production. This was Colonel Nimrod Wildfire, the hero of James K. Paulding's Lost Prize Day, The Lion of the West, which was produced at the Park Theater, New York City, on April 25, 1831. The role of Colonel Wildfire, a raw Kentuckian recently elected to Congress, was the prize, was to be responsible for the names of the play and the hero. Wildfire was acclaimed as a contribution to the gallery of Native American types, along with Hackett's Solomon's Swap, and though two rewritings of the play over a period of 20 years, remained one of the most successful roles of an actor's career. The one surviving speech of the play appears in several newspaper, almanac, and jokebook versions, attributed now to Colonel Wildfire and now to the meter David Crockett, who in 1831 was nearing the end of his second term in Congress. According to Paulding's son and biographer, the playwright disclaimed any intention to take off of that well-known personage, eliciting from him the following reply. Sir, your letter is of 15 inst. Was handed to me this day by a friend of Mr. Wilde. Newspaper publications which you prefer I have never seen, and if I should have been taking in reference myself an exclusion of many who fill offices and who are as untaught as I am, I thank you, however, for your civility in assuring me that you had no reference to my peculiarities. The frankness of your letter introduces me to say a declaration from you to the effect that it was not necessary to convince me that you are incapable of wounding the feelings of a strangler or unlettered man who had never injured you. Your character for letters and as a gentleman is not altogether unknown to me. I have great honor and respects. David Crockett. Hey, Cubing. Whatever Paulding's intentions, the actor's interpretation and the public's acceptance of Wildfire must have profited by a resemblance between the two lines of the West, even to Crockett's taking a bow at the performance of the play. Thus, the wood engraving of Crockett on the cover of the 1837 Almanac is virtually indistinguishable from the cut of Hackett in the role of Wildfire. Following the Crockett version of the Wildfire speech, the author of Sketches and Eccentricities of Colonel David Crockett of West Tennessee, 1833, has this to say about the play. This scene, with some slight alteration, has been attributed to understand an imaginary character, Colonel Wildfire. This I have not seen, but I am unwilling that the hard earnings of Crockett should be given to another. Such curious coincidences and correspondences illustrate the way in which folklore become mixed with life and literature, and also it points to the fact that many Crockett stories may have had their source in current anecdotes and been identified with other characters. Davy Crockett. If the prevailing rusticity of American folk heroes may be said to constitute one of their chief attractions, then none of them is more attractive than Davy Crockett, the prime example of the country boy who made it good. Crockett was rude and uncouth, writes one of his admirers, but honest and heroic. To a homely sense of the backwoodsman, he joined in spirit as brave and chivalrous as any that followed the banner of Black Prince against infidel. His rise to fame serves as a peg on which to hang the moral. You can't keep a good man down. It is certainly a very curious phase of American, especially of Western character, which is exhibited in the ease and promptness of which the calm passes from one act of singular dreams of life to another. Yesterday, a rough bear hunter. Today, a member of the legislature. Tomorrow, about to be a member of Congress, and the fearless opponent of his old commander, General Jackson. Such sudden and successful advances in life are scarcely seen except in our country, where perfect freedom opens a boundless field to enterprise and perseverance. Although in his own day Crockett's name was a household word for his jokes as well as his achievements, the image of the colonel that endures today is not that of a national political figure or the martyr of the Alamo, but that of a comic woodsman. While historians of the Alamo epic may, with Frank Norris, deplore the fact that Crockett is a hero only in a funny story about a sagacious coon, the epic's loss is humor's gain. The transformation of this prototype from the folks of the Creek philosopher and the grassroots politician into the archetype of protean, wandering, legendary American hero of the Munchausen-Esspiegelgen breed is an important and fascinating chapter in the annals of American hero-making. In The Gentleman from the Cane, ring-tailed boar is superimposed upon the comic backwoodsman, who is essentially the droll Yankee with more guts and gusto and less guile to become the gamecock of the wilderness. Because of his many-sidedness, his lively, humorous, homespun figure has supplanted the romantic frontiersman of the Daniel Boone type as the heroic version of the poor white. It rivals any other American hero. Thus, in his gumption, he outdoes the older contemporary, Mike Fink, who he resembles as a game hog, an Indian fighter to whose tough guy he plays a smart aleck among Backwoods Boasters. In his role in the crackerbox philosopher and storyteller politician, the Coon-Skin congressman anticipates Lincoln, although with Crockett storytelling was a business more than an art, the business of being a wag and a good fellow. While electioneering, the colonel always conciliates every crowd into which he may be thrown by the narration of some anecdotes. It is his manner more than his anecdote which delights you. Pursuing this course, he laughs away any prejudice which may exist against him, and having created a favorsome impression, enforces his claims by local arguments, showing the bearing of great national questions upon the interests of persons whom he wishes to represent. This mode, together with the faculty of being a boon companion in everyone he meets, generally enables him to accomplish his object. The anecdotes of Crockett's Washington adventures show the irrepressible woodsman, playing up the accepted notion of himself as a rustic wag and wisecracker, a role in which he seems to have been victim partly of his own ambition and good nature, and partly of the designs of political fans and foes. Yet in his speeches in Congress, where he served 3 terms between 1827 and 1835, he is a sincere, plain-spoken champion of the people, with an occasional stroke of hard-hitting sarcasm. Sirs, I do not consider it good sense to be sitting here passing laws for Andrew Jackson to laugh at. It is not even good nonsense. Out of those that the President has got about him, I have never seen but one honest countenance since I have been here, and he has just resigned. Okay, get a pause. Because stats are coming up. Let's see if you... One microphone. Oh, there we go. So it's nice to know the author, well, not author, but editor is already giving a warning about language in the book. Because I will not change the language myself. I like going to historical sources for a reason. I did not realize he would talk this much about an archetype. I was really hoping more for stories. Anyway. Continuing. In the autobiographical comic prose epics ascribed to him, 1833 to 1836, he becomes our first Southern humorist. From now on, laughter gains ascendancy, and the horse sense gives way to horseplay. Posthumously, he plays the buffoon in the Crockett Almanacs, 1835 to 1856, where his heroics are swallowed up in a slapstick and hokum. Hoax, legend, myth, and caricature, he thus runs the gamut of the poor but honest farmer who made good on his own wits and go-aheadedness. That's a word, go-aheadedness. Be sure you're always right, then go ahead. To the demigod... To the demigod who totes the thunder in his fist and flings the lightning in his fingers. Somewhere between the two extremes, the real Crockett has been lost. Even the stock figure of the backwoods bully and boaster yields to the rip-roar Superman of the joke books, whose tedium is relieved by the occasional flash of vernacular prose poetry or comic sublimity, as in Crockett's Morning Hunt. Folk memories of Crockett lingered in occasional hunting yarns in the South. Throughout the following sketches, Crockett is essentially the hunter in pursuit of even bigger and better game, from varmints and politicians to challenging elements. Nowhere in the backwoods mythology more alive than in Crockett's encounters with his animal friends and foes, in which Crockett is half varmint, and every varmint is half Crockett. 4. Mike Fink. In one of the Crockett almanacs, we read of a shooting match between Crockett and Mike Fink, a hell ferocious fellow, and an almighty fine shot, in which the former lost by default. First, Crockett aimed at 150 yards, and the ball cut off both the old tomcat's ears close to his head, and shaved the hair clean off across his skull, as slick as if it had been done by a razor, and the critter never stirred, nor knew he had lost his ears until he tried to scratch them. Next, Mike aimed at a sow with a litter of pigs around her, away and further off on the other end of the world, and kept loading and firing for dear life, till he hadn't left one of them pigs enough tail to make a toothpick on. Then Crockett mended Mike's shots, for which he had left one of the pigs about an inch of a tail and cut off the rest of it, as if it had been drove off with a hammer. That made Mike kinder, sorter wrathy, and he sends a ball after his wife, and she is going to spring after a gourd full of water, and knocked half her comb out of her head, without stirring her hair. Dang bots. And calls out to her to stop from me to take the blizzard, as what was left on it. Angel-Ferris critter stood still as a scarecrow in a cornfield, and she got used by Mike's tricks along practice. No, Mike, says I. Davy Crockett's hand would be sure to shake if his iron war pointed in the 100-mile of a she-male. And I'd give up beat, Mike. These feats of marksmanship are in the true Mike Fink tradition, which range from driving nails with bullets to shooting tin cups and scalps off of a head. Mike's unique claim to fame among dead shots lay in the fact that most of his shooting wagers were sadistic pranks. As a bully and cut-up hellbent for fun, Mike had more in common with the pseudo pseudo-bad men of the West than he ever had with river pirates and common ruffians among whom he moved. Unlike the frontier rascals who thought that even a crime might take on an aspect of a good joke, Michael was the one to carry a joke to the point of it becoming a crime. He was quite impartial in his choice of victims, shooting off a darkie's heel because he disliked the shape of forcing his woman to lie down on a pile of leaves for which he set fire to cure her of looking at other men. Born of Scotch-Irish parents at the old Fort Pitt in 1770, Mike Pitt in his youth acquired the reputation as an Indian scout, the best shot in Pittsburgh. As the country filled up and the Indians were pushed across the lakes and beyond the Mississippi, wrote Morgan Neville in The Last of the Boatmen, 1829, many of the scouts, from a strong attachment for the erratic mode of life, joined the boatmen, just becoming a distinct class. Among them he soon distinguished himself, not only as a snapping turtle in the Ohio, but also as a demigod of the rivers, and whom, according to Bernard Devato, Casanova, together with Paul Bunyan, merged into Thor. It was a perpetual fight on the boatmen with the river that made reckless savages. Among the various types of river craft, the keelboat offered the greatest challenge for a boatman's strength, skill, and endurance. In ascending the river, it was a continued series of toil, rendered in some irksome by the snail-like rate at which they moved. The boat was propelled by poles against which the shoulder was placed, and the whole strength and skill of the individual was applied in this manner. As the boatmen moved along the running board, and their heads nearly touching the plank on which they walked, the effect produced on the mind of an observer similar to that of one beholding an ox, rocking before an overloaded cart. Their bodies, naked to their waists for the purpose of moving with greater ease and enjoying the breeze of the river, were exposed to the burning suns of summer and the rain of the autumn. After a hard day's push, they would take their filet, rather ration of whiskey, and having swallowed a miserable supper of meat half burnt and of bread half baked, stretch themselves without covering on the deck, and slumber till the steersman's call invited them to the morning filet. Notwithstanding this, the boatman's life had charms as irresistible as those presented by the splendid illusion of the stage. Sons abandoned their comfortable farms of their fathers, and apprentices fled from the service of their masters. There was a captivation in the idea of going down the river, and the youthful boatman who had pushed the keel from New Orleans felt the pride of a young merchant after the first voyage of an English seaport. From an exclusive association together, they had formed a kind of slang peculiar to themselves, and from the constant exercise of wit with the squatters on shore, the crews of other boats, they acquired a quickness and smartness of vulgar retort that was quite amusing. The frequent battles they were engaged in with the boatmen in different parts of the river, and with the less civilized inhabitants of the lower Ohio and Mississippi, invested them with the ferocious reputation which has made them spoken of throughout Europe. In the same year that Noah Ludlow introduced the Hunters of the Kentucky to the people of New Orleans, Mike Fink became as one of Ashley's men in the service of the Mounted Fur Company, for as the supremacy of the steamboat was established, the flatboatmen and keelboatmen turned in their other fields. Some went to work on the steamboats, others became raftsmen, and still others, like Mike Fink, joined the trapping and trading expeditions across the Rockies. At Fort Henry in Montana, this champion marksman, hunter, and fighter, and lover, boaster, and jester was killed in a scrimmage, in which the various types of prowess were called to play. Oh, and we've found our first song. I'm trying to read the music for it real quick. It says treble and C clef. It has no bass. Okay. This will be fun. Really. I'm sure it will. the hunters of Kentucky. Ye gentlemen and ladies fair who grace this famous city, just listen if you've time to spare while I rehearse a ditty. And for the opportunity conceive yourselves quite lucky, for 'tis not often that you see a hunter from Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. We are a hardy, free-born race, each man to fear a stranger. Where the game we join in chase, despising toil and danger. And if the daring foe annoys wherever his strength and force is, we'll show him that Kentucky boys are alligator horses. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. I suppose you've read it in the prints of how Pac-Man's attempted to make old Hickory Jackson wince, but soon his scheme repented. For we with rifles ready cocked, though on such occasion lucky, and soon around the general flocked the hunters of Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. Suppose you've heard, I suppose, of New Orleans, who's famed for wealth and beauty. Those girls of every hue, it seems, from Snow White to the city. So Pakenham he made his brags, and if the fight was lucky, he'd have their girls in cotton bags, in spite of old Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. But Jackson he was wide awake, and wasn't scared at trifles, for well he knew what aim we take with our Kentucky rifles. So he led us down to cypress swamps, and ground was slow and murky. There stood John Bull and Marshal Pomp, and here was old Kentucky. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. A bank was raised to hide our breast, not that we thought of dying, but then we always like to rest, unless the game is flying. Behind it stood our little force, none was just to be greater, for every man was half a horse, and half was a gator. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. They did not let our patience tire before they showed their faces. We did not choose to waste our fire, so snugly kept our places. But when so near we saw them wink, we thought it time to stop them. And 'twould have done you good, I think, to see Kentucky pop them. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. They found it less 'twas vain to fight, where lead was all their booty. And so they wisely took to flight, and left us all the beauty. And now if danger ever annoys, remember what our trade is. Just send for us, Kentucky boys, and we'll protect you, ladies. Oh, Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky, the hunters of Kentucky. That was a catchy tune. Would not take long to get the rhythm of it. Roaring Ralph Stackpole. Colonel, said he, you're a man of authority and my superior officer. Wharf, there can be no scalping between us. But my name's Tom Dowdle, the Radman, he screamed, suddenly skipping into the thickest of the throng and sounding a note of defiance. My name's Tom Dowdle, the Radman, and I'm for any man that insults me. Long leg or leather breeches, green shirt or blanket coat, land trotter, river roller. I'm the man for a massacre. I don't know about that. Then, giving himself a twirl upon his foot that would have done credit to the dancing master, he proceeded to the demonstrations of hostility, which, when performed in after years on the banks of the Lower Mississippi, by himself and his worthy imitators, were, we suspect, the cause of their receiving the name of the mighty alligator. It is said by naturalists of this monstrous reptile that he delights, when returning to warmth of spring, he has brought his foes to their holes, and placed them basking on the banks of the swampy lagoons, to dart about the center of the expanse and challenge the whole field to combat. He roars, he blows the water from his nostrils, he lashes with his tail, he whirls around and round, churning the water into foam, until, having worked himself into a proper fury, he darts back again to the shore to seek an antagonist. He had a gallant companion of horse-thieved boasted blood, and afterwards did the name of the alligator half-breed, who could scarcely have conducted himself in a way more worthy of his parentage. He leaped into the center of the throng, where, having found elbow room for his purpose, he performed the gyration mentioned before, following it by other feats expressive of his hostile humor. He flapped his wings and crowed until every chancellor of the settlement replied the vote of battle. He snorted and neighed like a horse. He bowled like a bear. He barked like a dog. He yelled like an Indian. He whined like a panther and howled like a wolf, till one would have thought he was a living menagerie, comprising within a single body the spirit of every animal noted for its love of conflict. Then, not content with such a display of readiness to fight the field, he darted from the center of the area allowed him for an exercise, and invited lookers-on individually to battle. "Where's your Buffalo Bull?" he cried, "to press horns with the roar of the Salt River? Where is your full-blood colt that can shake a saddle off? Where is the old nag who can kick off the top of a buckeye? Where is your cat of the knobs, your wolf of the rolling prairies? Where is your old brown bar that can claw the bark of a gum tree? There is a man for you, Tom Bruce. Same to you, Sim Roberts. And you, Jimmy Big Nose. And to you, and to you, and to you. Aren't I a ring-tailed squealer? Can go down salt on my back and swim for the Ohio. Where is a man to fight roaring Ralph Stackpole?" Okay, he sounds like a nut job. Hunters of Kentucky. The Lion of the West. The Lion of the West was played on Friday evening and drew a crowded house, notwithstanding the inclemency of the weather. The principal character of the production is, to use his own elegant language, a screamer. Some idea of his peculiarities may have formed from the following sketch which he gives in the affair between himself and a raftsman. "I was riding along the Mississippi in my wagon when I come across a feller floating downstream, settling up in the starn of his boat fast asleep. Well, I hadn't a fight for 10 days, felt as though I should have had a kiver myself and salt barrel to keep up. So wolfy about the head and shoulders, I says, 'Hello, stranger, if you don't take your boat and we'll run away with you.' So he looked up to me at slantadisler, and I looked down on him slantadisler. He took out a chore of tobacco and says, 'I don't value that tantamount of that.' And the varmint flapped his wings and crowed like a cock. I riz up, shook my mane, and crooked my neck, and neighed like a horse. He run his boat plump, head foremost ashore, and stopped my wagon and socked my triggers. 'Mister,' he says, 'I can whip your weight in the wildcats and ride straight through the crabapple orchard on a flash of lightning. Clear Medax disposition. Best man have I ain't a, and I wish I may be charitably six-fronted.'" A wireless phone charger. Does it look like a Tesla? Two belligerents throw an issue, and the colonel goes on to say, "It was a pretty severe colt, but no part of the priming to such a feller was put me, eh? I was put to him mighty droll. In 10 minutes he yelled, 'Enough! I swore I was a rip-saver.' Says I, 'Ain't the yaller flower of the forest, and I'm all brimstone but the head, and that's aquafortis.' Says he, 'Stranger, you're a beauty, and if I only knowed your name, I'd vote for you the next election.' Says I, 'My name's Nimrod Wildfire, half horse, half alligator, and a touch of an earthquake.' That's the prettiest sister, fastest horse, and ugliest dog in the district. It can outrun, outjump, and throw down, and drag out, and whip any man in the cane tuck. Man in the cane tuck. Which... Oh, crap. There's another song on the next page. Hey, little Leo's in chat. Place for Apple headphones and a hidden port for an Apple Watch. You have to take a picture and put it on the Discord. Kind of curious to see what that would look like. A vote for Crockett. I had taken old Betsy, he said, and straggled off to the banks of the Mississippi River, meeting with no game. I didn't like it. I felt mighty wolfish about the head and ears, and thought I could spile if I wasn't knurled up in salt, for I hadn't had a fight in 10 days, and I come across this fellow floating down the stream settling, in the stern for a boat fast asleep. Said I, "Hello, stranger, if you don't take care of the boat, he'll run away with you." And he looked up and he said, "I don't value you." He looked up at me, Slantinkler, and I looked down at him, Slantindickler. And he took out a jar of tobacco, and he said, "I don't value that," said him. "Come ashore, and I'll whip you. I've been trying to get a fight all the morning." And the varmints flapped his wings and crowed like a chicken. I riz up, shook my mane, and neighed like a horse. He run his boat plumb up my shirt, and tied my galooses tight around my waist, and on it went. He was a right smart coon, but hardly a bait for such a feller as I. I was a rip saver, said I. Ain't it the yoke? Okay, he went. He was a right smart coon, but hardly bait for such a feller as me. I put it to him right mighty droll. In 10 minutes he yelled enough, and swore I was a rip-strapper. Said I, "Ain't I the yaller flower of the forest? And I am all brimstone but the head and ears, and that's all local force." Said he, "Stranger, you are a beauty, and if I'd know your name, I'd vote for you next election." Said I, "I'm David Crockett. I know you what the biggest ticker and the roughest tracking horse in the district. I can kill more liquor and fool more varmints and cool more men out of any man than you can find in all Kentucky." Said he, "Good morning, stranger. I'm satisfied." Said I, "Good morning, sir. I feel much better since our meeting." But after I got away a piece, I said, "Hello, stranger. Don't forget that vote." Okay. Well, it's in the morning. Oh. Oh, this is going to be fun to sing. This does not look like the version of a song I've heard before, which is perfectly normal for folklore because you never expect to hear the same thing sung twice. Because, once again, you've got a song. You'll hear me flipping back and forth between the verses and the chorus. The Ballad of Davy Crockett. Now, don't you want to know something, kind of where I come, from where I got my learn? Oh, the world is made of mud and round the Mississippi River. The sun's in ball of foxfire, as well as you may discover. Take the ladies out at night, they shine so bright. Oh, I can't get the rhythm down this one. Oh. Okay. I said him too. About Davy Crockett. Now, don't you want to know something? Now, don't you want to know something concerning where it was I come from and where I got my learning? Oh, the world made of mud of the Mississippi River. The sun's a ball of foxfire, as well you may discover. Take the ladies out at night, the shines so bright they make the... Oh, not this older music. Come on. Now, don't you want to know something concerning where it was I came from and where I got my learning? Oh, the world is made of mud, the time of the Mississippi River. The sun's a ball of foxfire, as well you may discover. Take the ladies out at night, they shine so bright, they make the world like... Ugh. I'm doing horribly on this one. I mean, it's just in 4/4. It starts with an upbeat. Don't you want to know something concerning where it was I come from and from where I got my learning? The world is made of mud from the Mississippi River. The sun's a ball of foxfire, as well you may discover. Take the ladies out at night, they shine so bright, they make the world light. They shine so bright, they make the world light when the moon is at her set. Oh, it bothers me because I'm trying to read treble clef as it is. And it's been a while since I've had to do 16th notes, and I really haven't tried to sing it. I don't want to just read it aloud because that wouldn't be any fun. Now, don't you want to know something concerning where it was I come from and where I got my learning? Oh, the world is made of mud out of the Mississippi River. The sun's a ball of foxfire, as well you may discover. Take the ladies out at night, they shine so bright. They make the world light when the moon is out of sight. And so one day I was going a spoon. I met Colonel Davy, and he was going a coonin'. Says I, where's your gun? I ain't got none. How you gonna kill a coon when you haven't got a gun? Take the ladies out the night that shines so bright. They make the world light when the moon is out of sight. Says he, don't calf, you follow after Davy. Soon you'll show how to grin a coon crazy. I followed on a piece, and there I saw the squirrel, sitting on the log and eating up sheep's coil. Take the ladies out at night that shine so bright. They make the world light when the moon is out of sight. When Davy did that, see, he looked at all around me, saying I want to know is the brace against you and me. And there I braced a great big sinner, grinned 6 times as hard as to dinner. Okay, I can't sing this one. Especially that was of course. They take the ladies out at night, they shine so bright. They make the world light when the moon is out of sight. The critter in the lock didn't seem to mind him. Just kept on sitting there and wouldn't look behind him. Then it was he said, the critter must be dead. See the bark a-flying all around the critter's head. Take the ladies out at night, they shine so bright. They make the world light when the moon is out of sight. I walked right up the truth to discover him. And thought it was a pie not so hard it made me shiver. Says he, pumpcalf, don't you begin to laugh. I'll pin back your ears and bite you in half. Yeah. I really can't do this one. I will play the music better than sing it. I flung my gun down and all my ammunition. Says I, David Crockett, can you cool your ambition? He throwed back his head and blowed like a steamer. Says he, pumpcalf, I'm a Tennessee screamer. Then we locked horns and we waltzed in the thorns. I never had such a fight since the hour I was born. We fought all day and at night, then we agreed to drop it. I was pretty badly whipped, and so was Davy Crockett. Yep, of course. I looked all around and found my head missing. Bit off my head, and I had swallowed his. And we did agree to let each other be. Yeah, I was too much for him, and he was too much for me. Yeah, definitely not the Ballad of Davy Crockett I heard before. Anyway. Telling stories versus talking government matters. About this time there was a great squirrel hunt on Duck River, which was among my people. They were to hunt 2 days, then to meet up and count the scalps and have a big barbecue, what might be called a tip-top country frolic. The dinner, and a general treat, was all to be paid for by a party having the fewer scalps. I joined one side, taking the place of one of the hunters, and got a gun ready for the hunt. I killed a great many squirrels, and when we counted scalps, my party was victorious. The company had everything to eat and drink that could be furnished in the new country, and much fun and good humor prevailed. But before the regular fall commenced, the dancing, I was called to make a speech as a candidate, which was a business I was ignorant as of an outlandish nigger. The public documents I had never seen, nor did I know there was such a thing, and how to begin I couldn't tell. I made my apologies and tried to get off, for I'd knowed I had a man to run against who could speak prime, and I'd knowed, too, that I wasn't able to shuffle and cut with him. He was there, and knowing my ignorance as well as I did myself, he also urged me to make a speech. The truth is, he thought my being a candidate was a mere matter of sport, and didn't think of a moment that he was in any danger from the ignorant backwoodsman bear hunter. But I found I couldn't get off, so I determined to just go ahead and leave it to the chance of what I should say. I got up and told the people I reckoned they'd know what I'd come for, but if not, I could tell them. I'd come for their votes, and if they didn't watch mighty close, I'd get them too. But the worst of all was that I could not tell them anything about government. I tried to speak about something, and I cared very little of what, until I choked up as bad as if my mouth had been jammed and crammed full of dry mush. There the people stood, listening all the while, with their eyes and mouths and ears all open to catch every word I would speak. At last I told them that I was like a fellow I'd heard of not long before. He was beaten on the head with an empty barrel near the roadside when a traveler who was passed along asked him what he was doing that for. The fellow replied that there was some cider in that barrel for a few days before, and he was trying to see if he could get any then. But if there was, I couldn't get at it. I told them that I'd been here a little while for the speech and came from a while ago, but I believed I couldn't get it out. They all roared out in a mighty laugh, and I told some other anecdotes equally amusing to them, and I believed I had them in a first-rate way, I quit and got down, thanking the people for their attention, but I took care to remark that I was dry as a powder horn, and that I thought it was time for us to all wet our whistles a little. So I put off the liquor stand and was followed by the greater part of the crowd. I felt certain this was necessary, for I knowed my competitor would talk government matters with them as easily as he pleased. He had, however, mighty few left to hear him. As I continued with the crowd, and now and then taking a horn and telling good-humored stories, till he was done speaking. Yeah, I could believe Crockett would do that. The Story of a Skow. While in the legislature, there was a bill before it for the creation of a county. The author of it wished to run for boundary lines so as to support his popularity. To this, the colonel was opposed because his interest was affected by it. They were hammering at it for some time. Whatever the author of the bill would affect my speaking, and the colonel would only undo by log rolling, until the matter was drawn to a close, when he rose and made the following speech. Mr. Speaker, you do know what that man's bill reminds me of. Well, I suppose you don't, so I'll tell you. Well, Mr. Speaker, when I first come to this country, a blacksmith was a rare thing. There happened to be one in my neighborhood. He had no striker, and whenever any of the neighbors wanted any work done, he had to go over and strike till the work was finished. These were hard times, Mr. Speaker, but we had to do the best we could. It happened that one of my neighbors wanted an axe, so he took along with him a piece of iron, and went over to the blacksmith to strike it till the axe was done. The iron was heated, and the neighbor fell to work, and was striking nearly all day. And the blacksmith concluded the iron couldn't make an axe, but would make a fine mattock. So my neighbor, wanting a mattock, concluded they would go over and strike till his mattock was done. Accordingly, he went over the next day and worked faithfully. But towards night, the blacksmith concluded his iron would make much of a mattock, but would make a fine plowshare. So my neighbor, wanting a plowshare, agreed that he would go over the next day and strike till he was done. Accordingly, he went over again, and fell hard to work, but towards night the blacksmith conducted the iron would make a plowshare, but would make a fine scow. So my neighbor, tired working, and cried and scow it would be, and the blacksmith was taking up the red-hot iron, threw it in a trough of water near him, and as it fell in, it sung out Skow. And this, Mr. Speaker, will be the way that man's bill for a county. He'll keep you there and doing nothing, and finally his bill will turn out to be a Skow. No mind if I'm doing it. Yep, sounds like politics. Grinning the bark off a tree. That Colonel Crockett could avail himself in electioneering of the advantages of well-applied satire and service. The following anecdote won't sufficiently prove that. In the canvass of the congressional election of Mr. was the Colonel's opponent, a gentleman of the most pleasing, conciliating manners, who seldom addressed a person or company without wearing upon his countenance a particularly good-humored smile. The Colonel, to counteract his influence of this winning attribute, thus concluded it would be a stump speech. Yes, gentlemen, he may get the votes by grinning, or he can out-grin me, and you know I ain't slow. And to prove to you that I'm not, I will tell you an anecdote. I was concerning myself, and I was fooled by a little bit of the wickedness. You all know I love hunting. Well, I discovered a long time ago that a coon couldn't stand my grin. I could bring one tumbling down from the highest tree. Never wasted powder and lead when I wanted one of the creatures. Well, as I was walking out one night, a couple 100 yards from my house, looking careless about me, I saw a coon planted upon one of the highest limbs of an old tree. The night was very moony and clear, and old Rattler was with me, but Rattler won't bark at a coon. He's a pretty dog in that way. So I thought I'd bring the lark down in the usual way, by a grin. I set myself, and after grinning at the coon a reasonable time, I found he couldn't come down. I wondered what was the reason. I took a steady grin at him, and he was still there. It made me a little mad, so I felt round and got an old limb about 5 feet long, and planting one end upon the ground, I placed my chin upon the other, and took a test. Then I grinned my best for about 5 minutes, but the cursed coon hung on. So, finding I could not bring him down by grinning, I determined to have him, for I thought to the tree, saw a coon still there, and began to cut away. Down it come, and I ran afterwards, but the coon wasn't seen then. I found that I had been taken for one, a large knot upon a branch of the tree, and upon looking at it closely, I saw that I had grinned the bark off, and left the knot perfectly smooth. Now, fellow citizens, continued the colonel, you must be convinced that, in the grinning line, I myself am not slow. Yet when I look upon my opponent's countenance, I must admit that he is my superior. You must all admit it, therefore. Be wide awake, look sharp, do not let him grin you out of your boats. Okay. Well, that explains the ballad. The Coon-Skin Trick. Whilst on the subject of election matters, I will just relate a little anecdote about myself, which will show the people to the east how we manage things out here in the frontiers. It was when I first run for Congress. I was in the favor of the hero, Andrew Jackson, for he had chalked out of his course so sleek in his letter to the Tennessee legislature that, like Sam Patch says, there is no mistaking it, and so I went ahead. No one dreamt about the monster in the deposits at that time, so, as I afterward found, many, like myself, were taken in by these fair promises, which were worth as much as a flash in the pan when you have to fair shot at the fat bear. But I'm losing sight of my story. Well, I started off to the crossroads, dressed in my hunting shirt and a rifle on my shoulder. Many of our constituents had assembled there to get a taste of the quality of the candidates that were orate. Job Snowden, a gander-shaped Yankee, who had been caught somewhere in the Plymouth Bay, had been shipped to the west with a cargo of codfish and rum, erected a large shanty, and set up shop for the occasion. A large posse of the voters had assembled before I had arrived, and my opponent had already made considerable headway with his speechifying in the street. And when they spotted me about with a rifle, shot from camp, and sauntering along as if I was not a party in business. There comes Crockett, one cried. Let us hear the colonel, said another. And so I mounted the stump that had been cut down for the occasion, and began to bushwhack in most approved style. It had not been long before there was such an uproar in the crowd that I could not hear my own voice, and some of the constituents let me know that they could not listen to me on such a dry subject as the welfare of the nation until they had something to drink, and that I must treat them. Accordingly, I jumped down from the rostrum and led the way to the shanty, followed by my constituents, shouting, "Huzzah for Crockett, and Crockett forever!" When we entered the shanty, Job was busy dealing out his rum in a style that showed he was making a good day's work of it. I called for a quart of the best, but the crooked critter returned no answer other than pointing to the board over the bar, on which said, in chalk in large letters, "Pay today, trust tomorrow." Now that idea brought me up all standing. It was a sort of concern in which there was no blackout and ready money in the West, and those times was the shyest thing of all nature, and it was most particularly shy with me on that occasion. The voters, seeing my predicament, fell off to the other side, and I was left deserted and alone, as a government will be when he no longer has any offices to bestow. I saw as plain as day that the tide of popular opinion was against me, and that unless I got some rum speedily, I would lose my election as sure as there were snakes in Virginia. And it must be done soon, or even burnt brandy wouldn't save me. So I walked away from the shanty, and put in another guest sort of way I entered it. For on the occasion I had no train after me, and not a voice shouted "Huzzah for Crockett." Popularity sometimes depends on a very small matter indeed. In this particular, it was worth a quart of New England rum, and no more. Well, knowing that the crisis was at hand, I struck into the woods with my rifle on my shoulder, my best friend in the time of need, and as good as fortune would have it, it had not been in more than a quarter of an hour that I treed a fat coon, and pulling the trigger he lay dead on the foot of the tree. I soon whipped his hairy jacket off his back and again bent my steps toward the shanty. I walked up to the bar, but not alone. This time I had half a dozen of my constituents at my heel. I threw down the coonskin upon the counter and called for a quart. And Job, though busy dealing rum out, forgot to point to his chalk rules and regulations, for he knew a coon was as good as legal tender for a quarter west, and as a New York shilling in any day of the year. My constituents now flocked over to me, and cried, "Huzzah for Crockett! Crockett forever!" And finding the tide had taken a turn, I told them several yarns to get them in a good humor, and having soon dispatched the value of the coon, I went out and mounted a stump without opposition, and the clear majority of the voters followed to hear what I had to offer as good as a nation. Before I was half through with my constituents, moved on so that they could hear the balance of my speech after they had washed down the first part with some more of Shabsnone's extract of cornstalk and molasses. And question been put, it was carried unanimously. It wasn't considered necessary to tell the yeas and nays, for we adjourned to the shanty, and on the way I began to reckon that the fate of the nation pretty much depended on my shooting another coon. While standing at the bar, feeling sort of bashful, while Job's rules and regulations staring at me in the face, I cast my eyes down to discover one end of the coonskin sticking out between the logs that supported the bar. Job had slung it there in a hurry of business, and I gave a quick short jerk and had followed up my hand as natural as if it had been the rightful owner. I slapped it on the counter, and Job, little dreaming he was barking up the wrong tree, shoved along another bottle, which my constituents quickly disposed of with great good humor, and some of them saw the trick, and then withdrew from the rostrum to discuss the affairs of the nation. I don't know how it was, but voters soon became dry again, and nothing would do but we must adjourn to the shanty. And as luck would have it, the coonskin was still sticking between the logs, as if Job had flung it there on purpose to tempt me. I was not slow in raising it to the counter, and the rum followed, of course. I wish I had been shot if I didn't, before that day was over, get 10 quarts for the same identical skin, and from a fellow, too, who in those parts was considered as sharp as a steel trap, and as bright as a pewter button. The joke secured me my election, for it was calculated like smoking among my constituents, and they allowed, with one accord, the man who could get away with a whip job on hand-snowing fair trade could outwit old Nick himself, and was real grit for them in Congress. The job was by no means popular. He boasted of always being wide awake, and that anyone who could take him was free to do so, for he came from the stock that, sleeping or waking, he always had one eye open, and the other not more than half closed. The whole family were geniuses. His father was inventor of wooden nutmegs, and with Job said he'd have made a fortune, if he had only taken out a patent and kept the business in his own hands. His mother, Patience, manufactured the first white oak pumpkin seeds out of mammoth kind, and turned out a pretty penny for us steeped in tobacco water. Pretty in the first season, and his Aunt Prudence was the first to discover that corn husks steeped in tobacco water would make a handsome Spanish wrappers for what came from Havana, and the oak leaves would answer all of the purpose for filling, and no one could discover the difference except the man who smoked them, and then it would be too late for him to make a stir about it. Job himself bragged of having made some useful discoveries, the most profitable of which was the art of converting mahogany sawdust with cayenne pepper, which he said was a profitable and safe business. For the people have been long accustomed to having brown dust in their eyes, and that there wasn't much danger in being found out. The way I got the blind side of Yankee Merchant was pretty generally known from before Election Day, and the result was that my opponent might as well have whistled jigs in a milestone to attempt to beat up the votes for the district. I beat him out and out, fought back in the old year, and there was scarce enough left for him, after the canvass was over, to make a good grease spot. He disappeared without even leaving a mark behind, and such will be the fate of Adam Huntsman, if there's a fair fight, no gouging. After the election was over, I sent Snell the price of the rum, but took good care to keep the fact from the knowledge of my constituents. Job refused the money and sent me word that if it did him good to be taken in occasionally, it serves to brighten his ideas. But I afterwards learned, when he found out the trick had been played upon him, he put all the rum I had ordered on his bill against my opponent, who, being elated from speeches he had made in the affairs of the nation, could not descend to examine the particulars of a bill of a vendor of rum in a small way. Okay. Yeah. Well, one decently sung song, one badly sung song. A wild snowfern in chat. And 5 minutes. No ads again. So, who should we raid? Do we look for another reader? I think Hart might be on. Check. Hart is not on yet. Belcourt's on. Weird, I don't see any of the other readers on my list. That's what we're doing today. Have I already? Oh, you got a shiny. Nice. Shiny snowfern. Okay. I'm gonna switch. Okay, back over here. I do not. Well, getting any shiny would have been exciting, but shiny Pikachu? Yeah, I could see that. Let's go ahead and read Folklore. We'll have to read her before she ends. She's reading poems, so I will hopefully see people tomorrow for fairy tales. Good night.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist, lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breeze a shiver, its ancient heart